You can go.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for giving up your lunch to come spend time in this space and talk about what I'm sure are going to be some very exciting things. I would like to welcome all of you, those of you who are here in person, and also those of you who have who are online. And also, I guess, start by thanking Motsamai for I mean, he's going to be giving a book launch in Stellenbosch, but when I approached him about trying to capitalize on this existing commitment to be in Cape Town and give this talk, he was very gracious enough to accept. So thanks for giving us your time. Also, thanks to Huma for agreeing to co-host this event with the Ethics Lab. I'm representing the Ethics Lab, where I serve as a senior research officer, and there our research development program is explores how knowledge from the African humanities can inform the ethical questions posed by new and emerging health technologies. And I think a lot of the work that we do fits broadly within Huma's own intellectual agenda on being human, whether that's questions around the human, non-human binary, human technology interactions, but also the broad intellectual tradition that we can call humanism and the critiques of that, but also the efforts to transcend that, whether that's in terms of post-human or transhuman debates. So I think there's very much a lot of synergies in our intellectual programs. So I'm going to introduce Motsamai quickly, who is going to be talking about some insights from his new book titled Ubuntu Ethics, Human Dignity, Moral Perfectionism and Needs. He's going to speak for about 30 minutes, 35, generously 40, and then the rest of the time will be devoted to questions and some discussions. I just wanted to give a little bit of the background of why what's this lecture aiming at. Like I said, we are interested in how the African humanities could inform the ethics of emerging technologies. And this program is very deliberately Africa-centered. So thinking about Africa, whether that's the idea of Africa, but also Africa empirically, conceptually, theoretically, how can that inform this broad domain we call ethics? And often one of the go-to in the existing literature is Ubuntu. Ubuntu has a rich intellectual heritage on the continent, but sometimes this can be a bit superficial, right? And so what the attraction towards an expert in this field is, I think, first and foremost, to get a sense of that field, its key concepts, its key debates. I mean, Motsamai's, his distinct argument is one among many different kinds of interpretations of Ubuntu. And I think the more we get a handle on the richness of this intellectual tradition, the better able we can think about the different questions that it allows us to ask and the different insights that we could possibly draw on when we think about ethics and technology. So that's really where this is coming from. I'm glad that we have, again, like I said, an expert in this area. Motsamai Molefe is an associate professor at the School of Business Leadership at the University of South Africa. He specializes in African philosophy, ethics, and governance. He also serves as chair of the Department of Inter-Africa Trade and Investment and is the editor-in-chief of the South African Journal of Philosophy. So welcome, Motsamai. Welcome again to everyone, and over to you.
Thank you, everyone, and good afternoon. Let's get right into it. So this is a structure of my talk. It really has 4 things that I want to deal with. The first one is this animal called Ubuntu. The second part, which is going to be the weakest part, the technologies that we're trying to think about. I'm not an expert in these technologies. I'll give the roughest account of them, but with that rough sketch, bring the tools from Ubuntu to see how we could start thinking about those. That's really what I want this talk to be about. See how we could rely on Ubuntu ethics to think about some of these emerging and new technologies. And specifically, I want to focus on two technologies. The so-called artificial intelligence and genetic engineering. My interest really is in genetic engineering, but I'll say very rough thoughts. And please hold me responsible for saying that these are reflections. And I'm going to take my comments as such. And I'm very specific that they're preliminary. And I'm here to invite other thinkers to think with me, so at least we start having a meaningful conversation. So that's the picture of what I want us to get into. So the starting point is that when we talk about Ubuntu, one of the major concerns is that Ubuntu could mean anything to anyone, you know. So there's many accounts of Ubuntu, there are theorists of Ubuntu. So when one wants to talk about Ubuntu, one of the most important responsibilities is to be very clear about what they mean about Ubuntu. And unfortunately, I won't have time to defend my version of Ubuntu, but at the very least, I'll try to give you a systematic account of how I think Ubuntu could look like. And I think it's one of the promising. This account comes from my latest book. It's just been published, I think, about a week ago with an outlet, Ubuntu Ethics. Where I try to really give a picture of what I think are the crucial elements of Ubuntu. And I want to draw from those crucial elements and see how we think of applicative value. In the book itself, I don't deal with the application. I just want to contribute just a picture of how we might want to think of Ubuntu. So I want to draw from those and see how we can get along. And I think the very aim is to indicate that Ubuntu does have intellectual and axiological resources to help us think about these issues that are pressing to us. So I hope I'll be able to articulate this vision of Ubuntu and apply it accordingly. Ubuntu, our gateway into Ubuntu ethics is that we make access into it by relying on at least two archives. The one archive is the rich oral archive. And the other archive, there's an extensive written archive. But the primary access to this concept of Ubuntu, we draw it from the oral archive. And one of the techniques that are used to archive knowledge in African cultures is a particular use of language, and specifically the use of proverbs, sayings, and so on. And Ubuntu is captured through the saying, a person in English is a person through other persons. In Nguni languages, umuntu ngumuntu ngabantu, in Sotho mutu ki mutu kabatu. So these pith expressions were used as forms of repository of knowledge, of wisdom. So when somebody says to you, a person is a person through other persons, it is not just an expression littered with the word person. It is a rich, philosophical expression that anyone who's a cultural insider, when they say to you, umuntu ngabantu, in a moment when you are insisting on drinking your beer alone, it's a serious complaint that you are refusing to be human. You are refusing to share yourself. He doesn't have to say you are refusing, umuntu ngabantu, and then they leave angrily. They've made a very deep philosophical statement, right? So we're going to analyze that particular saying to get some of its philosophical and ethical import. So I think of these sayings as an oral library, as an oral library. So one of the biggest problems with English-sized renditions of Ubuntu is that it divorces itself from this library, and mainly because maybe many of those who want to enter into it do not have access to this archive because there are linguistic limitations. The advantage then of having access to the sayings that are expressed in the native language, that it allows you to get into this archive. This is just one of many other sayings, but this one is essential. It's at the heart of capturing Ubuntu. And I want to analyze this so that we see what we can get out of it. If you look into this particular saying, I break it into 3 components, and these components, they correspond with the occurrence of the word person. A person, the first instance, is a person, second instance of the person through other persons. And I associate these 3 as components with particular values. Right. So this is not a mere tautology to say a person is a person. That is obvious, a person is a person. But when an African thinker expressed this particular expression, they meant something deep. They meant something deep. So the first instance of the word person there embodies 2 aspects of a person. At one instance, it's referring to a fact of a human being. So if you see going to hunt, and as you're about to hunt and you're ready to shoot, and someone says, hey, it's a person. They're saying that it's not an animal, it's a fact about what's out there. On the other hand, the idea of Ubuntu expresses a statement of value. Right. The idea that we usually typically think of in the literature in terms of moral status or in terms of human dignity. So the idea of Ubuntu at once, it's a statement of fact, at the same time, it's a statement of value. That the presence of Ubuntu is a presence of a being of value. And that value will refer to it as human dignity. And what's distinct about this idea of value as captured by the idea of human dignity is that it's passive. I don't do anything to have dignity. I just have to present as a human being to have dignity. So the idea of a person, the very first instance of it, strikes us with this fact of a human being that is simultaneously a being of value, right? As opposed to the presence of a tree does not quite, at least in this thinking, doesn't quite invoke a value in that sense. When we say Ubuntu, you're dealing with a being, a being of value. So we have the distinction between the ontological and the normative sense of personhood. So that's the first word of a person. The second instance of it, a person is a person. It imagines a process of moral becoming. That when you start off merely as a human being that has a particular kind of passive value, but you've got a possibility to move from a passive value to what I might call an active value. This is the value that you gain through the process of moral transformation, which the moral agent is involved in by morally transforming the capacities or potentialities of their humanity so that they are characterized by excellence of virtue. So when a person is a person, imagine a moral process, imagine a movement merely from being a biological organism, a human being, to being a person that is characterized by virtue. So it's a process of moral becoming. So a person is a person. You imagine a human being with particular potentialities or particular endowments. The development of those endowments amounts to the emergence of a person. Right? So you draw a sharp distinction between a human being and a person. Right? You achieve personhood. But the first kind of a person is merely ontological. It's the kind of a thing that you are. But the kind of a thing that you are is possessed with particular potentialities. The development of those potentialities amounts to the emergence of a person. Then we can say you have Ubuntu. You have Ubuntu, something that you have because you've developed your endowments. I'm not going to specify what endowments these are. I do so in the book. But so a human being is believed to be morally special because you've got these endowments. And because you've got these endowments, you have dignity. The development of these endowments amounts to the acquisition of Ubuntu or a status of personhood, which is characterized by the value of excellence of virtue. Say you are virtuous or you are morally excellent. So the chief goal of morality is for you to become a person, not merely human, to do something with your humanity, to develop your humanity so that it is characterized by excellence. That's the chief goal of morality. So to be then, when we say you are a person in the second sense, we are actually, it's a positive assessment of your conduct. We're saying you've conducted yourself well. It's a positive assessment of the quality of your character. as a moral agent. It amounts to being highly praised. It is affirmation. It's a statement of affirmation of one's moral achievements. Right? So much that we can't deny the first kind of a person. We cannot say you're not a human being, but we can deny the second kind of a person. So there's that to say we can't deny that you're a human being, but we can deny that you don't have Ubuntu relative to how you've conducted yourself as a human being. So to say that you are a person in the second sense is the same thing as to say that you have Ubuntu. When Tutu talks about this particular sense of Ubuntu, it says, when we want to give high praise to someone, we say, you Ubuntu, that's a closer expression. And it says, it means, hey, so-and-so has Ubuntu. Then you are generous, you're hospitable, you're friendly and caring and compassionate. You share what you have. And these are character dispositions that characterize you as an individual, the way you relate with others. And something very interesting about these character dispositions, they take a particular form. It's what you do as you relate with others. You're generous, you're caring. These are the kinds of virtues that you can't practice alone. These are virtues that connect you with others. So that's an interesting thing that's a relational feature of this normative account, which makes it distinct from other virtue accounts that also emphasizes very individualistic aspects. But this one says, for you to be human, you must connect with others in particular way. And this is not surprising because a person is a person through other persons. So that's why even the virtues characteristic of Ubuntu are those that throw you into relationships with others. So note the relation between 1 and 2. 1 says you're a human being. 1A says you're a human being, but there's also 1B with particular endowments. And the development of those endowments amounts to 2, right? Is a person. So one thing that comes out here, a human being has got a duty to develop themselves. Theories that tend to emphasize the duty to develop, to perfect yourself. In moral theory, we describe them as perfectionist theory. So one interesting characteristic of African ethics that it tends to have this perfectionist element. That is why if you look at the title of the book, is the subtitle is Human Dignity and Moral Perfectionism. You've got this dignity that you have merely because you're a person. But there's another kind of dignity at play. This is a dignity that you achieve relative to how you relate with another. Right? So the entire period of your life, during different continuities and temporalities, you're engaged in this process of realizing your true destiny by developing yourself. So it's that perfection element in it, which one has to develop. And when scholars defined Ubuntu to have Ubuntu, when you have achieved this perfection, is they use the term that they love to do is that you are humane. And by humane, they mean you are characterized by pro-social attitudes and conduct. Your empathy, caring, and so on and so forth. So roughly that's the picture that they give us. So when you say you have Ubuntu, you have a humane disposition. It's a quality of character that you have. Then, so 1 and 2 points us to a process where a human agent has to transform themselves to become this thing, this characterized by excellence. That's the what part of it. Right? What does Ubuntu expect from you? But there's a how part of it. And the how part of it plays itself at 2 levels, through other persons. That's the how part of it. It plays itself at 2 levels. It plays itself at a micro level. At a micro level, it's the relationship that we have amongst ourselves as individuals. But what's of interest for me is not that one. It's important. What's interest for me is the macro level, where the duties that have to do with the state or with the state. What duty does the state have to assist individuals to acquire Ubuntu? And I think that the profound point that I was trying to point to when I got to this, in conditions of slavery, in conditions where people are disabled, I think it's unfair and unjust to expect them to have Ubuntu. So what I was trying to do here is that what kind of conditions are conducive for us to expect people to have Ubuntu? And I think that's a very important conversation in South Africa. In South Africa, I mean, post-apartheid, we expected people to have Ubuntu, but no one really asked about the material conditions of people. So I find that to be very abusive. So, but what I try to do in this particular project is to say, what kind of social conditions must exist for it to be meaningful to expect people to pursue Ubuntu? That's the question that I'm asking. And I'm saying one of the things that I say here, drawing from the literature on, I don't focus so much on personal resources about how you must be as an agent, right? The effort you must put in, the development of your volition, conation, consistency, discipline, all of that. That's important at an individual level, at the personal level, as an agent. But I look at the big issues, the macro issues, where the individual has to negotiate their lives, right? Negotiate their life. And I look at those as structural and institutional issues, right? The kind of environment you must find yourself in. And when you think about these institutional issues, you think at two levels. On the one hand, you're thinking about the policies in place from the state. On the other hand, you're thinking about the actions of the agent that are carrying out these policies. And those two give us a sense of what I mean by structural and institutional issues. And by political and Ubuntu thinking, it imagines that we need to have conducive conditions for the emergence or for the possibility of Ubuntu. In this particular sense, why? Because for you to be able to pursue Ubuntu, you're expected to be an agent. So in other words, you must create conditions for the emergence of a robust agent. You must create those conditions. In other words, if you live in an environment where you don't get proper development and you're not developed as an agent, it will be unfair for us to expect you. In other words, if you don't get good early child development and you are stunted in your development, and then we come and say you must pursue Ubuntu, there's something unjust there. So what I do here is try to imagine what kind of conditions are conducive for us to expect people to pursue Ubuntu. And I'm saying there's a particular role that the state must play there. And the two concepts that are used in the literature on Ubuntu is the concept of the common good and the concept of a human minimum to define the kind of conditions that are conducive for the emergence of a robust agent, what I call a robust agent. And the idea here is that there are certain basic goods that are necessary specifically for the emergence of a robust agent. And a robust agent is one that we can rightfully expect to pursue Ubuntu. And Oruga uses the idea of the human minimum. Odero Oruga is a Kenyan philosopher, and by the human minimum, he refers to those goods that are necessary for the development of, he calls it a rational agent, right? I think rationality is really to give us a simple picture of what it means to be human. We're not only rational, we're also relational, we're also emotional. We've got all of these facets that capture the essence of our humanity. But the point that he has is that you need to have developed rational capacities. You need to have developed emotional capacities. You need to have developed relational capacities for you to be able to engage in this. And it says for that to happen, the state has a duty to provide the human minimum. And by human minimum, at least on his account, it specifies three things. It specifies health. You must have access to public health so that you are able to have a body that can function. 2, you must have access to education so that you're developed intellectually so that you can be able to interpret and engage the world. And 3, it says you must have access to meaningful way to survive and to be able to live subsistence. Those are 3 things that he mentions. So if you think of it structurally, a decent life for the emergence of a robust agent is one that provides these conditions. And when these conditions are there, then we can expect human beings to live a dignified life, that we recognize that you are a being of dignity. But moreover, we require you to pursue Ubuntu. So roughly, those are 3 things. So 3 things that stand out from this particular account. 3 crucial values emerge. The first value that is crucial is the fact that just by being human, you're a being of dignity. And we must respect you as such. Before you do anything, before you greet people, before you hate anyone, just by being in the world, when you just come out of your mother's womb screaming there, you are a being of dignity, right? The second thing is the value that there's a duty that's associated with you as a human being to pursue excellence, or to pursue virtue, what we call Ubuntu. That's your task. And you can think of this excellence in the moral and non-moral sense, but for the purpose of this project, I think about it at the moral sense. And finally, the needs. the state has a duty to provide those basic needs, which I describe as a human minimum, which represent the conditions that are conducive for the emergence of a robust agent. So we've got then, roughly, that's the picture of Ubuntu that I developed. Yes, let's jump quickly to the technology. I'm left with 10 minutes. I hope I'll be able to do justice to this. So I think about two technologies. I think about genetic engineering, and specifically in the domain of genetic engineering, I think about this whole thing of modifying and improving human beings, right? And this enhancement could happen at various could happen. Okay, I'll get to that. But just the idea that we could manipulate human genes to make certain modifications for purposes of increasing or augmenting or making better, right? So we can be able to manipulate genes in that sense. On the other hand, we could have computers that can mimic human intelligence, right? Computers, and the various forms of this artificial intelligence have very narrow ones, and for the super ones that can do it at great levels, where they can really manifest a very sophisticated form of intelligence. We are presented with those two possibilities. And the question that we're asking, how can Ubuntu intervene in the space where we are confronted by these two technologies? I'm not sure time is on my side. Maybe let me start with the one that I'm very excited about, genetic engineering. So the question that we might want to ask in terms of Ubuntu in this one, is it permissible to, the first question, is it permissible to enhance human beings via genetic engineering techniques? So in the first instance, we say, yes, it is permissible. And I'm thinking specifically of three kinds of enhancement. The first one is aesthetic enhancement. You want to shape your nose to make it sharper. You want to broaden your mouth so your speech is clearer. You want to play with any part of your body. Aesthetic, right? If you feel that you are ugly and you want to really make an impact visually, perceptually. On biological enhancement, you want to make your life, you want to live longer. You want to enhance yourself to live longer, right? Or any other kind of enhancement that is not controversial. And the last one is moral enhancement. And I think Ubuntu is compatible, it's comfortable with these kinds. And for that, I'm going to offer an analogical argument. And the form of this analogical argument is that you take two objects. If it holds for these objects, then it should hold for this object. But the argument is strong to the extent that there's greater similarities between these two objects. That's philosophy 101, right? And so analogical argument, right? So in other words, if we permit improvements in certain regards in African thought, and we used other technologies, it would be absurd for us when other technology that is also a technology like this that can also be used to improve human beings in the way that we want to, then we say no, it's not allowed, right? I hope you get the logic here. So yeah, I mean, for example, intuitively, African people and also people who subscribe to Ubuntu would allow human beings to enhance themselves in different ways. And some of those are very controversial. Sometimes when you're struggling morally, you can be taken to a Sangoma to assist you, to enhance you, to say, what is wrong with you? We throw bones to find out what's wrong. And you could be given herbs to empower you to improve morally. So in other words, the point I'm trying to say, I'm saying there's empirical evidence within this particular culture where there is no aversion to using other technologies to improve people. And I'm saying if there is that openness to use these other technologies, what reason could there be to say the use of genetic engineering may not be permissible? The use of genetic engineering may not be permissible. And what is important here, and I'm going to clarify maybe other issues. So I think the use of traditional modes of enhancement give us a prima facie basis to be open to enhancement. To open to enhancement. Maybe the question might be, hey, maybe going to the genes might be too far. Maybe that's where the concern might be. the argument that I want to make, is that maybe it will come out clear. As much as Ubuntu, I think, would permit the enhancement of a human being in their aesthetic, in the biological longevity, and also in the moral sense. Now, it would permit people to give you a pill that can help you work on your disposition. It would not be opposed to that. You can give you a pill, say, eat this pill, it will help you to have Ubuntu. It will lessen your anger against being landless. It could do that. I think they will not have a problem with giving you a pill, particularly if you have a challenge. But I think what is very crucial to get about the structure of this moral thought is that it's a movement that operates within the human domain. There's a sense in which the human domain is considered to be sacrosanct, to the extent that it would not buy into the agenda of the transhumanist agenda that wants to go beyond the human. In other words, as much as we would be open to enhancements, but those would be enhancements that enhance us insofar as we are human beings. And remember, it's the emphasis of a person is a person. The emphasis on the category of a human, it's augmenting you as a human being, not to go beyond what it means to be human. In other words, insofar as the enhancement you are getting allows you to function as a human being, then that enhancement is permissible. But an enhancement that would go beyond what it means to be human, it's an enhancement that does an injustice to even Ubuntu itself, because Ubuntu, at the heart of Ubuntu, is a theory about a person as Ubuntu and what is possible to Ubuntu. But it's not a theory that has the ideals of going beyond the realm of the category of being Ubuntu, a person. And this is important also if you think about it. This is important also when you think about it in this way. If you look into the idea of Ubuntu, at least in terms of the idea of human dignity. The idea of human dignity, and I think it helps us to understand why there's this limitation. The idea of human dignity plays two functions. On the one hand, it serves as a standard of excellence. It tells us that because of the capacities we have, there's a particular ideal we can reach as human beings. That's why it's called human dignity. It specifies the biomoral standard we can reach as the kind of a species that we are. So the idea of human dignity has got that of specifying a standard for a particular ontological kind, human beings. So there are no aspirations of going beyond this ontological kind. On the other hand, the idea of human dignity don't only serve as a standard of the kind that we are, it also serves as a constraint. It imposes limits. On the things that can be done to human beings. You know, there are particular ways we should not treat human beings. We should not be abusing, we should not be torturing, we should not be kidnapping human beings. But at a deep level, we should not be doing things that will stop us from being human, that will transport us outside of humanity. So one of the crucial functions of this idea of human dignity provides a parameter within which we can think of enhancements, but also it provides a boundary beyond which we cannot go, So as much as it is comfortable with genetic engineering, manipulating human beings to enhance them in particular way, the kind of enhancement imagined is not consistent with the one that is imagined by transhumanists. And I'm saying the work, the concept, the value that does the job is this value of human dignity, because this value has got two functions. On the one hand, it serves as a parameter of the goals that we must aspire to, and those the potentialities those are defined by the capacities of our human endowments. We can increase these endowments insofar as we increase them within the human realm, but there is no space for us to go beyond that, because we'll be outside of the realm of Ubuntu. Ubuntu is a theory for a person to be a person. So I think So I think the idea of human dignity does something very powerful here. It allows for genetic engineers to do their work, to enhance us, make you more beautiful, give you a pill that can allow you to be kind and all of that. But what it limits is that you cannot go beyond what it means to be human. You cannot go beyond what it means to be human. So I think maybe I could just do another reason why it does not quite also allow us to go beyond the realm that is imagined by transhumanists is that moral theories also prescribe how we should relate to a value. Some theories tend to say we must maximize a value. In other words, we must be the best of that thing, even to a point of going beyond it. Right? The logic that is characteristic of African thought is not one that requires us to maximize the way that utilitarians would. It's one that requires us instead to satisfy. To satisfy means good enough is sufficient to pursue satisfactory levels of perfection. It's not one that requires you to go all the way in terms of perfection. And these constraints are informed by the idea of human dignity itself, but they're also informed by the idea of human relationships themselves and the limitations that they impose on the things that we could do. So two reasons that explain this idea, the idea of human dignity and also the idea of the moral logic that informs this approach to ethics, is that it's not one that requires you to optimize or to maximize. It's one that really merely requires you to satisfy. So I think in terms of genetic engineering and its implication, those are just the insights that I think come out of this. I'm not sure if I could make a comment, 3 minutes on AI. Maybe just so I make 3 preliminary reflections, right? So if the value of human dignity is crucial, say AI should be packaged and proposed in a way that recognizes and affirms human dignity. So in other words, human beings have got a value that cannot be replaced, that cannot be substituted, or that cannot be replicated. I mean, the human value. But if there's something that can perform the functions associated with the human beings, those functions are not the essence of our value. Those functions are crucial for us to be able to do things and to achieve certain things, to optimize our processes in terms of if we've got something that can do that, that's okay. But when we have that kind of intelligence at play, it must be purposed in such a way that it recognizes the importance of human dignity. So one of the crucial values as we adopt and think about AI is how it must be packaged around recognizing human dignity. And this is important because often there are many technologies that we employ, but when we employ this technology, what tends to suffer the most is human beings. So human beings can be made subjects to these technologies, right? Or subjects to other human beings through these technologies. But the idea that comes from Ubuntu is that technology should be used to enhance, to recognize in the first instance, the value that's associated with a human being. The second idea is the idea of excellence. In this particular sense is that how could we propose this technology to become an instrument that would, enable human beings to pursue excellence. In other words, what these technologies we should be thinking of, that it could really become a good partner in rethinking excellence and in opening new domains of excellence. There are jobs that I think we've given to human beings that human beings should not be doing because they don't quite allow human beings to operate in the domain of excellence. If you're going to spend the rest of your life as a black woman cleaning a white person's house, all your life, that's what you do until you die. And when you die, they give you a watch and say, thank you, you've wasted your time. So what I think artificial intelligence can give us robots that can do that. And we free this black woman and say, what other things can you do with your humanity that will enhance your humanity and you can contribute to humanity? In other words, there's ways in which the way the world is structured has robbed a lot of human beings. But I see possibilities that how can we propose this to free human beings from other functions? And if you think in terms of Maslow's hierarchy and allow them you know, to be self-actualizers, right? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these jobs. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with these jobs, essentially. But I'm saying sometimes when I think about this, I picture jobs, I think, did this person growing up thinking that this is a job they want to do with, is this what they thought was the essence of their humanity? And I think what this thing does, it could give us an opportunity to rethink what jobs can we get, what opportunities can we create for human beings that will in a sort of way that we say that will make them to be human, that will enhance their humanity. And I think there are many other jobs that don't quite do that. And I think what artificial intelligence can do, it can free us from those, and we can create a world where human beings can really be engaged on proper pursuits. As to what these pursuits are, I am not sure. I know Socrates, when Aristotle thought about this, thought about thinking about gods and doing mathematics. I'm not sure, but I'm saying whatever you think to be important for you to be human. And yeah. And the last point is that when we're facing this inequality that we have in the world, how can we deploy this to become a tool that can fast track the closing of gap of all of these needs that a lot of people have because of this inequality? And I think this could be very important if we think about it in terms of global inequality, which is characterized, which has left so many people stuck in needs. But how can we take this technology and then redeploy it differently to say, how do you use it as a tool to cover these needs that are so massive? Because the tool brings with it so much efficiency. So how can we efficiently now, given that politicians have been slow, how can we efficiently now implement policies that can really help us to deal with this large scale of needs and inequality in the world? So I think these three values can really help us to repurpose the function of this technology. I want to leave it there. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Motsamai. And while I give everyone a moment to just maybe collect their thoughts and pose questions, just to offer a brief, I guess, comment, well, I'm not going to attempt a summation, but I think the I'm drawn to the sort of cardinal principle of human dignity that you're at least trying to put front and center in this account, a particular understanding of human dignity that's drawing from Ubuntu Ethics. And it allows us to, at least that's the evaluative framework according to which we make assessments on the social and political and economic environment in which, you know, these technologies are deployed. So at every point in time, at least I don't want to put words in your mouth that you're saying, you know, technology is neutral, but at least there's the intimation that technologies and the relations they're part of can either humanize or dehumanize us. I think there's that recognition in your work, and so that serves the constant question that we ask, right? So, for example, thinking about the future of work and the rollout of artificial intelligence, whether that be say in digital platforms or whatever, the constant question that I think you're pushing us to ask is, are we being humanized or dehumanized in this environment? I did notice that as much as you put these, you raised importantly the social and political conditions. So you raised the question, you know, we should evaluate institutions according to how they, whether or not they promote, you know, when you're asking what conditions will exist for the meaningful pursuit of Ubuntu. And there was something about the way in which you were talking about, I think it was genetic engineering, that I think there's a techno-solutionism in there that skips over those social and political conditions. So I take your point about the prima facie acceptance towards the permissibility of engineering. But given that these interventions are going to be at the individual, I mean, your example was, the individual who takes the appeal to develop sort of pro-social enhancements. I think there is a question about what is a legitimate target of enhancement, individuals or social and political institutions. And I think it'd be interesting to hear you sort of just reflect on that again, like, what, I mean, you did sort of think about what I think in when you were giving the example of artificial intelligence and say welfare systems, as and thinking about the way in which you could sort of optimize these for assisting in lives and experiences that are more human. But I mean, just one thing I just wanted to put on the table again is that where's the attention at? And there's a tension, right, between an individual's virtue that that's being cultivated, but also you also want to bring our attention to the social and political context in which these are articulated. So so that's sort of just one comment. But yeah, thank you very much for that, and for again that evaluative framework of human dignity as the barometer by which we judge the different versions of the desirable futures that emerging technologies are putting on the agenda. And with that, I'd like to open the floor for, I had Olerato's hands up first, and then we'll have Liza and then Divine. You can take this first 3 rounds of questions, and then we'll take another.
Okay, thanks. I think we just teaching a section on African ethics of personhood this week, so I think it's good that you're here. Yeah, so I just wanted to ask 2 questions. So the first one being about the theoretical framework, Ubuntu Ethics. So I was wondering, in terms of enhancement in particular, they can arguably be 2 kinds of enhancements. First, the kind that address deficiencies, right? And I think those are the kinds that we see with people going to consultants, for example, and setting deficiency. But there's another form of enhancement, which I think is the more controversial, right? Which is to the cognitive capacities, right? Let's say you already have the cognitive capacities that are required, but then you want to add more, then you create a kind of systematic advantage, or whatever you create an advantage for yourself, right, relative to other people in the community. So I think obviously that raises certain interesting questions around how Ubuntu Ethics governs fairness, especially. So I thought that would be an interesting thing for you to comment on. The second thing being maybe pressing you on the issue of transhumanism, right? Is that one could argue that transhumanism is pushing the boundaries of the human as opposed to violating the human, right? So one, I guess the question there is, why should we be limited by the current and perhaps possibly limited understanding of the human in governing whether certain transhumanist opportunities are going to yeah, so it's a matter of like, why should we be so committed to how humanness is currently understood, and when transhumanism would possibly give us an enriched version.
Thanks, Olerata. Liza?
Thanks. So part of my question will actually touch on just noted. So I'm interested actually in the relationship between the descriptive and the normative sensing of the person. Because you say you've got human dignity, human excellence, and needs. And you seem to imply that human dignity is a virtue of the descriptive version of being a human. You said when you're born, we have, you have just a version of human, so descriptively human. And so 2 questions related to that. So it sounds like you're the normative version of what is to be a person. So you tie in a very conceptual way to the descriptive notion of being human. And my question is, why? Right? I mean, do you really want to be a for our species? So I suppose we come across another being that's not a human, that is, has all sorts of, advanced cognitive and emotional capacities. Would we a priori going to deny that we could extend Ubuntu to that feature? And then it also touches on the question of genetic engineering. So you want to say, we shouldn't do something that changes essentially, but this with what needs to be human in the descriptive understanding of the word. And my question is kind of like, well, would that be such a bad thing? I mean, suppose you think, like Kant, from the predictive of humanity, no straight things are made. Well, there are lots of things about being human as a social, as a species category. It's not really the past, we're not particularly nice things. Wouldn't it be a good thing if we could get rid of a lot of our very aggressive traits, for example, and it would make us a better person in the normative sense. But it would extend us as on a descriptive level. It would maybe change something fundamentally at a descriptive level, but it would make us better persons, and that might be a good thing.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Liza. And then Divine?
Yes, thank you very much. I always love your provocations. I'm going to start the last comments and say, when I hear we are not particularly nice, I don't want to add myself to it, because we assume a certain universalism, and some of us have just only recently been added onto this category of this human and universal, because the entire project was to ensure that we are civilized and we make up because we're inadequate, so we have to become, etc., etc., etc. So this we that is centered, all the time, is very problematic. Because some of us are just ascending, and building upon that, that's also what I'm thinking a lot about. Because this we somehow has been homogenized, and when I read about Ubuntu, there's Ubuntu, there's of course Ubuntu, there is the Ubuntu with Abusi, Bulaga, there is Ubuntu with so many other people. When I was in Senegal, they were talking about meat, and they're trying to make the difference between meat and meat, but which was also really deeply located within religious thinking, particularly Islam, but also particular versions of Islam. So again, I want to talk about plurality about this. But what I find interesting, on one side, in terms of resolving one of the tensions, you're asking that the state needs to make an intervention, which I find interesting because somehow I think Ubuntu, when I read it, is a kind of an essence that exists outside of what is presented as the person, or exists outside of a body, which also relates to how you're thinking about the body, and that the body, in terms of transforming the body, we should take Ubuntu, there are ways in which we can write Ubuntu into this thing. And Ubuntu says, in a way, I might be wrong, but I'm not very good at philosophy. I used to run away from my class. In Ubuntu, because it's an essence that exists outside of the body is approached as a collective body. So it's not necessarily your body, but it's a body that belongs to a collective. So this having to really think about the body in an authorial sense, you need to change and adjust and do all of these sorts of stuff, which comes out of a different conceptual framework. Wouldn't be possible itself, even to move to the stage where we start thinking, no, now you can change into this and that. So I'm trying to trouble that and also to see, is it really possible to bring these two worlds together? I'm also thinking about some of the other categories that, concepts that you're using. Like when I see person, I see moral value, biological organism, human being, moral becoming, potentialities, endowments, emergence. All of these are concepts that come out of a particular place, which got a certain relationship with person, which is very different from Ubuntu. So how do we bring all of those, aren't we overburdening Ubuntu? Lots of conceptual categories that have a completely different history.
Thank you.
Over to you.
Thank you for these difficult questions. So thanks, Olorado, for your questions. So the first one is the emphasis, and I think maybe my emphasis is maybe my emphasis comes from my location, where already I'm dealing with deficiency, and I'm dealing with deficiency, and also because I've just, particularly the South African case, and maybe Africa, where there's always been an expectation that people should pursue Ubuntu, but the conditions of lack, of deficiency, of needs that disable, for me, it's what I'm dealing with. So in that particular context, I think I think intuitively all of us would agree that we really need this technology can really play a crucial role. Added capacity, look, all things being equal, particularly if you think of fairness, all things being equal, one would say, yes, there's nothing wrong to do that. But I think in a context where there is so much inequality and the state has to think about distribution, I think the state has to make sure that it lessens conditions that are humiliating before it can think about doing positive projects. So I think the negative project of saying, let's deal with the bulk of, but all things being equal, I don't think Ubuntu would also have an issue with that. I don't think Ubuntu would have an issue with that, so long as it's within the domain of enhancing human dignity. So long as it's within that domain, I don't think there'll be an issue, because the threshold is defined by human possibilities. So the question that you're asking is a more challenging one. Why not go beyond this? Why not go beyond this domain? So in terms of my theoretical framework, I'm open to that, as long as you're not going to call it Ubuntu. As long as you're going to call it something else. But if I'm using Ubuntu, and this is very important, conceptually, the word Ubuntu is tied to the word, to the project of Ubuntu. Right? So Ubuntu refers to generality, Ubuntu refers to a specific instantiation of a human being. So conceptually and philosophically, there's a way in that Ubuntu is connected to a project of Ubuntu. But the minute you want to go beyond Ubuntu, you're no longer, properly speaking, in the domain of Ubuntu. You are engaging in a different theoretical framework. So it's just even the word Ubuntu. It talks about prospects and possibilities of Ubuntu or a person in that sense. So that is why the transhumanist, and maybe the problem could be the philosophy itself, that it had not imagined that there could be possibilities beyond that. But if you take a religious interpretation of that, you have ancestors. And an ancestors could be a transhumanist vision of this, but I offer a secular interpretation. But if you take a religious interpretation, the very idea of an ancestor imagines, but there's an insistence of referring to these as persons. There's an insistence on giving food to these people. There's an insistence of saying these people are cold, let's give them blankets. There's an insistence of trying to lock them within the human domain. I don't see, and they're not eternal. Over time, they also perish. So that's why I'm saying that if you're working with a theoretical framework that commits you to Ubuntu, that these limitations that I think are built into the theoretical framework itself, whether you take it secular or you take it in a religious connotation. The best that you can be is an ancestor, but when people forget about you, then you disappear into oblivion. So, but yeah, so that's roughly, yes. Look, thanks, Liza, for your question. So I think, so first of all, I think, I'm not sure that speciesism is such a bad thing. I think maybe let's start there. There's an assumption that when you say speciesism, that you're talking about something terribly bad, right? In the African thinking, different species occupy different levels, and relative to its level, that species has got its value. Right, has got its value. If you look into the ontological framework, so what I'm trying to say to you, so when you say we are prioritized species, yeah, you're correct. We're a privileged part of planet Earth. If you prefer to describe it as species, no, we're comfortable with that. We have no issue with that. So that's the intuition that's at play here. Ubuntu becomes the gateway through which we negotiate value, not just the value of the human beings, but the value of every other thing. Precisely because other things can't negotiate their value. Right? So that is just the thinking that frames how Ubuntu approaches the question of moral status and all of that. So now moral status is imagined in the very first place through the moral game of humanity, right? Through the moral game of humanity, and precisely because, at least in the spatial temporal space that we are on, only human beings can participate in that game. Right? Suppose then a sheep comes and there are brothers who are different from us who can also engage in value. We may have to have their game that is consistent with that species. And that game as well might also involve certain moral rules that might intersect with ours. And that provides an opportunity for us to expand how to relate with these new beings. But Ubuntu, when it was imagined for beings like you and me have to deal with trees and mountains. And until those people arrive, our game is structured in this speciesist format. And I think that experimental aspect of it is beautiful as well. So in other words, we were not anticipating them, but when they arrive and the moral issue that arise relative to us, a new moral game will emerge. And that moral game will help us to rethink ourselves and rethink that relationship. Yes. Yeah. Thanks. I've been interested that we take those on. Yeah. So get rid of. For me, the idea of getting rid of certain things, I think there's that question, I think, and this is a very Christian thing. There's that question of if Ubuntu is something that we achieve, is it do we have there's an intuition that there's something beautiful that Ubuntu puts forward, that with there are certain things, there are certain dispositions that we're going to have that are not good. But part of what it means to have Ubuntu is to struggle precisely against those things. Those things are things that we must work to overcome so that we behave Ubuntu. So the framework doesn't seem to be one where we want to get rid of those. So we might enhance ourselves in a particular way, but the kind of enhancement that I'm imagining is not one where we necessarily get rid of certain things, but where we put ourselves in a position where we can be able to more effectively fight those challenges that are inherent in our nature. I don't know if I'm making sense. So that it makes sense to say that we've achieved something. I think that's the kind of logic that, because inherent in this idea, there's this perfectionist orientation. And perfection says, I must develop these things. But the idea of development that is imagined there imagines that I'll have challenges, there'll be problems. So the whole game here is not to entirely remove from, but to put me in a position where I might be able to deal with problems. But those problems will still be there. So I'm not sure. Yeah, maybe we can reduce your aggression, but I'm not sure we can entirely say that we're going to make you. And also I'm worried about the element of liberty, of freedom, to say, hey, I had freedom to do this, but I was able to overcome it. And I had these internal struggles. And also maybe I'm dealing with the high nature, lower nature idea. That's a very Western idea that we have to fight animality. Do we then remove animality altogether? I'm not sure. It's something that I need to think about. Do we have to get rid of animality? Yeah. Yes. Thanks for your comments, Divine. Look, I think also here it's a tension of theoretical frameworks and tension of disciplines here. So theoretical framework in terms of, but also in terms of the starting, in terms of personality. So the personality of this book imagines, in the very first instance, an interpretation of Ubuntu that is secular, Ubuntu with particular endowments, And I'm using the word endowments here. It's an English word, but I think all of us believe that human beings have got particular things that they're born with, particular potentialities in that sense, not in any loaded word. And I'm using in that sense. But the idea of Ubuntu that you are invoking, it's anthropologically and ontologically rich, because so one of the interpretations that you find in religious interpretations or metaphysical interpretations is that Ubuntu is characterized by vitality and energy that is divine in its essence, and this energy is a divine offshoot. So Ubuntu is able to connect with other human mundus because of this energy. So the essence of Ubuntu is not necessarily the body, but it's this thing that allows them to enter into that connectivity. So I think the admission that I want to make that I'm not working with that ontological frame. I'm not working on that ontological frame. In my other works, you'll find it. But here, I'm working on one that says, I'm trying to imagine a secular account of Ubuntu. And I'm not sure if I'm working with a secular account of Ubuntu, how much damage am I doing to Ubuntu? But I'm saying, what can we do with this damage to Ubuntu in thinking about some of these challenges that we're facing? But you are raising very, very serious issues to say, maybe one might have to do a survey of these different conceptions of Ubuntu, because that lies at the heart of it. That lies at the heart of it. But I'm trying to imagine, a secular account of Ubuntu, and I'm trying to say, what can I do with it? Yeah, but also the idea about plurality of what it means to be human as well. It's an interesting idea. Is there something, is there an essence that is fixed about what it means to be human? Right, and it's an idea that I think I need to think about. Thank you.
Before we take another round of questions here, I'm also aware that it's your time, so you can leave if you absolutely need to. But I also want to give those online a chance to ask a question. Are there any questions online? Okay, then I saw Nabil's hand up, and I saw Amina, and then I'm going to conclude things after that. Hope that's fine with everyone. Okay, so Nabil and then Amina.
Thank you so much. So you mentioned something related to getting rid of animality, which is something very important that also personally mentioned about the distinction between humanity, like humanity and animality. So I want to hear what you think about the essentialist notion that we can get rid of our animality. Why animality is something very much it's part of us as well. So as much as we claim humanity, humanity itself must be gotten rid of in a certain way, and also the distinction between bio and the philosophy of human and animal. It's something very much tricky, because animality itself is not something. It has a sort of freedom, reduced to a status of an animal or something. It has itself a kind of freedom, going to the starting point in a certain way. It's and the critique of political animality, philosophy on the start and Derrida and the moral monster. It has a form of agency, to go back to the animality. So I want to you notion how can we locate this political animality within the humanity of Ubuntu?
Thank you. Amina?
Yeah, thank you so much, bro. I'm really curious about whether, if you could elaborate on the question of organ transplants and how can we locate this theoretical analysis of Ubuntu with bioethics. So if I think about it, as you've explained, if I am to receive somebody's organ, then it goes to never belong to the biological, and in that sense, is the enhancement biologically done? Could that be an example of Ubuntu, but then it goes back to that specific location in number one? And what does it mean
when we are enhanced through other people's body parts biologically. Yeah, I guess the translation of that as a relational gifting within the religion.
Thank you.
Oh, hand up. Last one. Okay. We took 3 the first round, so we'll take 3 again this round.
Okay,
The
so,
Mohammed?
thank you, thanks. My question is going to be very brief. I just, because something just came into my mind right now, and I thought I wouldn't be able to just listen and ask. So I want to understand our perspective or your view on this, because you mentioned it in a great classroom. The whole notion of Ubuntu, and it's very much, especially in the African setup, it's very much linked to one's identity also and all those. And so we get in the notion of identity also for Africans. And as we were saying, that our Ubuntu and all those kind of things. And you also mentioned the notion of ancestors, because there is no way that in an African setup, the notion of ancestors is very, very much important. Now, with human enhancement and all those, now, how do you then link all those with Ubuntu as, you know, the notion of that is rooted in identity, in human dignity, with ancestors and all those as Africans, whereby we are looking forward to that, to go to the village of ancestors, as you call it in one of your book, you know, the village of ancestors. Now, how do you then look into that distance person who is genetically modified and all those? How are they then accepted? Because remember that also with just being a human itself, there is those that categories that cannot accept that under 1, 2, 3, 4. Now with this one of enhancement and all those, now it fits into the African setup of understanding your person.
Thank you. Thank you for a very interesting questions. So look, when I use the idea of animality, very interesting, right? So there's animality in a biological sense, in a sense that there are certain things that we share in common with animals. Maybe largely because we're animals, we have to eat, we engage in sexual reproduction and all of that. Those are things we share in common with animals. So when I talk about animality, there's a sense that I'm using it in that descriptive sense. But also there's a sense in which we use the word animality in African thought and also in Western thought, where we use animality normatively to say that you are conducting yourself as if you're an animal, right? So as much as you are allowed to have sexual relations that are consensual, but when you go around raping, we're saying that you are now expressing your animality. You are behaving like you're an animal, where you are failing to control yourself. You can just have sex with anyone without respecting human relations. So there's that sense. And then Africans would say you're an animal in that sense. You're an animal in that sense. In other words, you are failing to control your edges, your sexual edges. You are behaving like an animal. To what it means to have Ubuntu to Ubuntu is just that ability to control these edges. So some people say, no, let's destroy the edges. So that's what they mean by destroying animality, right? So, but look at these two different senses. There's a sense in which descriptively we can say we're animals. We've got these capacities that we share in common with animals. We have to eat. But does that mean I must go around looting, breaking into people's house? When I do that, I'm failing to manage and control my animality, right? So I'm not sure if this distinction really helps. So in other words, we say, when we see you are a delinquent, disturbing people, stealing, we can say when you are passing the, hey, this one is an animal. You see, when we say that, we're saying that you are living below what it means to be human. In other words, you're allowing your animal nature to control you. You are not allowing Ubuntu to take his possession and engage in ways that are productive in social interactions. So I don't know if that answers you, but I just thought if I offer maybe that clarification of how I use animality, that's what I mean. So when I say get rid of animality, I'm saying I don't think we'll still be human if we get rid of these edges that characterize us as human beings, because those are the ones that give us a place to strive towards personhood, Ubuntu. So the essential part of what it means to Ubuntu. Yeah. So I hope it helps, right? Organ transplant. So very important. What has moral status is a person, not their organs. Right? That's what has a status. So even if you lose your hand, you still are a person, you have dignity, right? So even if we take your blood, you still have dignity. right? It's not the part that constitutes you as a biological being that have moral status. Even your genes don't have moral status. It is you, the possessor of genes, that has moral status. That's why we can allow for enhancement. See what I mean? So even if you donate your kidneys, that does nothing to your status as a human being, and also, so that is will be permissible in Ubuntu thinking, because moral status is a property of a person, but not a property of the organs of a person. So in this particular view of Ubuntu, organ donation would be permissible. Would be permissible. Your question is very tough. Your question is very tough. So, but maybe the long and short of it is that I work with a very secular interpretation of Ubuntu. But if you want to take ancestors seriously, so the way this idea is imagined is that you have a journey. In this journey, you must grow, and there are certain resources that a community has put in place to grow you. And some of these resources is your family. Some of these resources is the moral education you get from the community. Some of these resources is that sangoma that your family consult with. Some of these resources are the rituals that all of those are form of enhancements, but we call them traditional forms of enhancement. But if all of these forms of enhancement are important for you to grow, the question is, why can't we just add another form of enhancement in genetically inducing you? So now it's part of the community. We get community of scientists in the African culture. They come now, scientists, we want to help you. We've been using these other ways. We've been slaughtering this one. The slaughter is not working for him. Let's not deal with genes now, so that we assist him. So ancestors will be very happy to say, hey, this community was very creative. Now they've even brought scientists on board to help us to help these struggling brothers and sisters. You see what the logic is. So the question that is will be fundamental, does this in any way violate harmony among members of the community? So, we adopt this as part of the community, except that they taking scientific means. We've got Sangomas there, we've got those of Swasho, we've got those of prayer, we've got all of these people, all of them, they're in the task of enhancement. But the difference is that these are using traditional forms of enhancement, these are using technological forms of enhancement. These do not in any way disrupt human community, they don't disrupt humanity itself. So identity and even your passage to ancestorhood is actually accelerated rather than disrupted. Thank you.
Thanks, Motsamai, for these preliminary reflections. I mean, on your own, more perfectionist account of Ubuntu, but I think, you've brought attention squarely to, I guess, debates around enhancement. Again, just ending here with the difference between traditional versus technological enhancement, at least not so much making your own not so much nailing your own colors to the mast, but at least, seeing that prima facie openness as a kind of productive, lever that we can work, and seeing the kind of different questions that it generates. Another sort of issue that you sort of brought our attention to, but didn't focus on, but I think it's worth spending more time thinking about. Again, in the distinction between the human being as an ontological versus a normative category. I think that there's a wide-ranging debates about moral status, right, and about what is the thing that differentiates us as human beings. And as we have humanoid robots and social robots doing a whole array of activities, or at least AI being able to imitate some kind of intelligence. I don't know if it's intelligence, but as it continues to blur that binary, I think we go back to the drawing board, to that first idea of Ubuntu, right? A person. That also, it's forcing us to rethink that ontological category, because ontology has often determined morality, right? If you put a thing in this camp, that determines how you treat it. As David Gunkel has recently written about. So I think this has been very helpful in sort of seeing what is the diversity of conversations that this ethical resource can be brought to bear on. Questions about, are humans as individuals or social and political institutions the legitimate targets of enhancement? And I mean, you've also commented broadly on the current sort of transhumanist political and ideological project. But really, when I think about, because these are kind of frontier technologies and their effects are largely speculative at this moment, right? So it's a question of futures and what kind of futures are desirable. I think that anchor of enhancing or undermining human dignity is I would say, the lodestar of the account of Ubuntu that you've presented. So thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you to all of you for coming and thank you to those online. There's some coffee, and Motsamai is going to hang around for a bit for some burning questions.
Yes.
Thank you.
Don't burn me.